Hi, my name is Renee, and I'm the lead developer of Stumbling Cat, working on Potions, A Curious Tale. If you are watching this, you are likely a game developer or interested in game development. So welcome to Making Potions Blog 16. I wanted to talk today about something that I didn't quite fully grasp early in my development, but I now have a pretty good understanding of. And that's just persistent data that matters to my game across multiple scenes. I know that some Unity developers prefer to use a single scene and do sort of dynamic level loading that they control themselves. But for most game developers, most beginning game developers, in fact, you are most likely going to be using multiple scenes to control level loading, having different levels, load scenes, things like that. So today I wanted to talk about the persistent singletons that I keep, as well as some other persistent data, well, non-persistent, but similar data that I keep across all of my scenes, so that you can consider if you need any of these managers in your own games. You can understand the amount of data and information that I actually keep and handle throughout my game in the different scenes, and hopefully to give you sort of some creativity, some things to consider, because a lot of this I found over years of development as I was working on my game. And some of these decisions that I made, particularly around keeping all of the non-persistent data on a single prefab that's in every scene, it actually took me quite a while to learn. So hopefully this will be a wonderful learning opportunity for you. And yeah, let's dive into it, right? So first, let's flip over to wrong one. The full main screen. There we go. So these are my singletons right here. And if you'll notice, I have two components here. I have a singleton, and this keeps consistent items across scenes. So this singleton persists across different scenes. I have one in every single scene, but whatever scene I load into, it destroys all of the other singletons as I go into different scenes. It's how they work. And then I also have this non-persistent data. So I'm going to start with the singletons, then we can talk about non-persistent. There are mostly managers, as you can see here on the right side. I have my inventory, equipment, etc. I'll go through that in detail. But also attached to the singletons, I have a few of these subcomponents that I want to talk about. The first is a screen fader that controls the loading of of fading in and out of the scene. You can see there where it's sort of loaded in from dark. That helps scenes not feel like they're just sort of jumping in. And it is persistent, so I can load in and load out of it without loading the object itself where it might pop into the scene. The other two things that are really important are these two objects that Wise uses to play the ambience and the music. This allows me to always have a consistent reference if I need to stop, pause, modify, overwrite any of the sound effects on these objects, and it allows me to keep music going between multiple scenes. So if I go from one deep dark forest level here to the next deep dark forest level, the music and the ambiance is going to persist instead of restarting, which would feel very jarring. So let's break into these singletons themselves. These are not in a consistent order here. So this singleton script just controls that it doesn't destroy. Pretty straightforward. And then where we get into these first four here is really the type of game that I have. I'm going to pop back to my camera to talk about this. So the game that I am working on, if you haven't seen any of the previous videos, is called Potions, A Curious Tale. It's an adventure crafting game where you play as a young witch. Because it is adventure and crafting, it means that I need to have an inventory and equipment. You need to be able to equip potions so you can then throw them, etc. You need to be able to gather ingredients that you can craft with them. You need to have recipes for those ingredients themselves. And then you need to be able to manage the rendering of that, et cetera, and some other things that I'll dive into. So that just gives you some initial context to what we're talking about here. So the difference between the inventory manager and the inventory itself is the manager is what sort of handles the inventory. The inventory is actually just the inventory. There's only 4 items in the inventory right now. I have separate values for both home and held. So you'll see that there's 10 blueberries and 10 berries held, but the thyme and feather at home. So if I were to start the game and go into my inventory here, I have the blueberries and the cherries, but not the other 2. The inventory manager is actually what I communicate with to do a lot of control of the inventory, adding and removing inventory items. This is similar to sort of a model view controller a design pattern, if you're familiar with that in web development. And one of the important things that the inventory manager does is it actually reads my CSV file that has all of the items in it. So let's pop back to my camera. It's actually quite difficult to manage all of your written objects and sort of like designer-esque items within an inspector or within the game itself. It can cause, especially if you're using like binary-esque values, like inspector values, it can cause a lot of git conflicts or whatever your source control conflicts is. I know that Unity has their own source control system that they're trying to, that reduces that to some extent, but I think the average game developer is usually using something like Perforce or Git or SVN. And because of that, you have to be very careful about those conflicts. The other advantage to using CSVs for loading information about items or recipes or dialogue is that it is accessible, readable, easily changeable, and easily localizable. I'm actually starting to talk with a localization person right now, and the fact that my whole game is in CSVs, all of the text that needs to be localized outside of a few buttons, it makes it really, really easy. I just add an additional column and say, this is now Spanish or Japanese or Korean, and then I can load that in. So yeah, CSVs are great, and that is what the inventory manager is dealing with. It's loading that CSV, and then it has all these nice other functions for communicating with it. You know, getting the item mana, adding items to bags, all of these really great utility functions, adding items to inventory list, etc. The recipe manager works very similarly. It loads a recipe CSV and works with the inventory manager when you're calling recipes to ensure that you're putting in ingredients that fulfills the recipe's needs. And then outside of sort of item management, the equipment is what you currently have equipped, is dialogue. Again, dialogue manager handles loading in the CSVs for the dialogue. I can also control things like the NPCs. So this is actually where I set all of the NPCs' names. This means I can adjust their names. The first value here is the name that they're referred to in the CSVs, and the second value is how they're displayed. In general, this is pretty much the same. Where this changes, again, has to do with localization and improvements. So if you'll notice here, I have, where is he? I have Tripitaka somewhere. Tripitaka, where are you? Grumpy Monkey. You should be near Grumpy Monkey. Sorry. Tripitaka. So Tripitaka is the name that is used for the monk character in Journey to the West in the most common English translation. However, I did more research and talked to some of my team members and learned that, I'm going to mispronounce this, Tong Sonzang is the most commonly used term worldwide for name for this character. And so I was just able to change it from Tripitaka to this. And then magically, across all of my dialogue, he suddenly had the correct name. So that has been super, super helpful, super useful, and is what the dialogue manager controls. And then has references to all of their sprite images so that when I call them, I can call up the appropriate image. I also have the ability to expand, I think I talked about this before, the dialogue manager to have expressions. So if I wanted to have different expressions for those characters, I could just add additional files that would have those facial expressions as well. The next thing that I want to talk about, and this is one where you're not necessarily engaging with it much in set values here in the inspector, is the progress manager. The progress manager is what saves the progress of the game. And what I mean by that is it's how I control what you have done. So it just saves a string, and if that string exists in the progress manager, list dictionary, and then you've done that thing. I also use it to control if you've interacted with a one-time use object, like if you've opened up a treasure chest, for example. I make a unique identifier based on the level and the object's location, and then that stores as a string in the project manager because that can be generated anytime you open that scene, and then you can check against the project manager to see if that item is in there. Same item, same scene, same location. It does mean that if you were to move a chest, like a treasure chest, a few pixels between builds, it will re-exist again. I don't think that's necessarily the worst thing. I could potentially put in another unique identifier. I might have multiple treasure chests in a scene, so I could put in something like that. But you get the general gist. Going back to the code here, I also have a cursor controller. The cursor controller controls the different cursors. So if I load into the game here, you can see that I have this default cursor here, and then if I mouse over something that's harvestable, it turns into this grabby hand. And if I mouse over other objects, it'll turn into a busy pointer, a door pointer, a locked door pointer, things like that. So that's just really good for managing a consistent cursor loading. I've tried loading direct values through the resources folder, and honestly, it just hasn't performed super consistently. I think there might be some issue when it comes to Unity about loading some items from the resources folder at the start of a scene. I'm not 100% sure on that, so don't take my word, but that's sort of the issue that I've run into, and that's one of the reasons why it's set up this way. This next one is actually quite interesting. So this is the game state manager. The game state manager is actually what manages if you're in a dialogue scene, a main menu, another menu, sort of like your inventory, etc., or if you're playing. This has been greatly modified over time, particularly to work well with the adjustments that had to be made for using controller, particularly because the normal progress button on controller is also AoE interact, and so there was some issues around exiting dialogue and then the AoE interact engaging dialogue the same frame. So there's some fail safes in there, as well as sort of priority queues for if you're stacking up multiple non-playing things. So if you have your inventory open and then you get into a dialogue sequence and then you open the main menu, it sort of pushes and pops onto a stack there, so you can manage that and maintain the game in its proper paused state, so you don't have spells exploding and other things going off. I found this a lot better and more consistent than just sort of doing a pause time, because it allows other things to continue. The next item that I want to go over is the game info manager. This is relatively straightforward. I have added a new thing to save the game version, and this is so I can reference it when I'm saving and loading. But this just stores information that I need to reference a lot. It stores the player object, which is girl, as well as her cat companion cat. She persists across scenes for the most part, but not always. So if you're loading into a menu scene, like the map select screen or the crafting scene where she doesn't exist, she won't exist here, but it keeps track of her so that when she's going between levels, her health stays the same, etc. And then it also controls the last input that you've seen. So if you've seen a keyboard or controller, that's where it's able to store that, because some things change with the UI based on which input system you've used last. So the level load manager is actually how I handled loading into a scene. It's not super complex. It allows me to both do a direct load level where I just load straight from one scene into the other. It also allows me to do an async load level where I load a loading screen before loading into the scene. How I've generally treated this is if I'm going between two scenes of a similar type, again from like Fairy Forest 1 to Fairy Forest 2, usually most of the type of things that can be loaded, prefabs, sprites, music are already loaded into that scene. So I just do sort of a direct load, and then I really lean on that screen fader to fade out and fade back and sort of cover up any hiccups there. But if I'm loading from the map scene into one of these bigger scenes, then there's a lot of data that has to be loaded. So that's where I make use of the async load level, and I load the loading screen first and then async load. The level load manager also handles spawn locations. Let's go back to the game here. You can see that in this level, I have the entrance area where Luna is loading in. I also have an exit where she can turn around and come back through from the next level. And then I have these staircases that she can go down, 2 of them in the scene, and a cave. So that's actually 5 different loading points. And each of these loading points has their own game object that doesn't have anything on it, but I can find that just by its name, and then ensure that when the girl is loaded, this level load manager saves that spawn location and the level that it's loading, and ensures that she is loading in the appropriate position for that scene. The music manager handles both musics and ambiance, and it just allows me to ensure that I have them consistently set here. It also can handle bank loading and unloading. I don't have that fully hooked up for all of the music and ambiance, but for porting to, like the Nintendo Switch, that's going to be super important. For those of you who are looking to go on to consoles, particularly the Nintendo Switch, definitely make sure that you're being cognizant of the amount of information that you're loading into your game at once. It's very easy to load all of your sounds into one bank and then have like a couple gigabytes of audio, which the Nintendo Switch only has 4 gigabytes of RAM, about 1 of which is taken up by the actual operating system, which leaves you with not a lot of space for your game. So absolutely make sure, if you're planning to have a lot of music or a lot of other sound effects in your game, that you're really considering how you're going to split them out and load banks appropriately and unload banks appropriately based on the levels that you're in and the other things in the scene that would be causing audio. Right. Then I have the bark manager. Barks are an interesting aspect of the game. I'm going to load into the home scene here. We're going to go through some dialogue. Actually, this is a good example. So you can see dialogue popping up here. This is traditional dialogue. It's appearing in the front of this screen, these NPC images are coming up. But I wanted the ability for NPCs to make commentary outside of that, and this is what I'm calling barks. Usually barks are audio within a game, but I'm treating this here as visual barks. So the bark manager handles this much like the dialogue manager handles dialogue. I've actually extended the bark manager to allow for like faked dialogue. This uses the dialogue system, but it's using the bark information control that a little unnecessary, but it was easiest for me. Then we have the achievement manager. This is really straightforward so far just because I'm not hooking up to many achievement systems, but it allows me to record achievements, and then it's going to be the controller for hooking into the different platforms, achievement, APIs and whatnot. I have cards in my game, magical cards that you can collect. These are kind of like items, but they're relatively unique in how they work. And because of that, it has a separate manager for it. I can pull up a card here if you're curious. Let's see. Drop a card prefab in there. Let's call it Baba Yaga. Ooh, that's not how you spell Yaga. There we go. And now once we load into the scene and totally ignore that the starting dialogue is happening in here again, you can see that it has loaded the card. It has dynamically loaded the rarity of the card. This is a gold card. I don't actually have an image for it. That's why they're all question marks so far. And then when I interact with it, I get a unique UI. You can't hear it. I've gotten a unique sound effect. This is loading, and all of this information, the name and the description of the card, as well as a card image, is what the card manager controls. And yes, once again, that is based on loading a singleton. I also have recently created a mini quest manager. The mini quest manager handles several NPCs. Here's a few of them, and their frequency of giving you quests. To not spoil it, I'm not going to say what causes this to tick up, but certain progression in the game causes these quest givers to give new quests. So it talks about it records the last number they were at. So right now they're at 0, and it talks about like what value it's at when they engage in a quest. So let's say you've done the magical thing 8 times, and then you talk with them. This would go from 0 to 8, and then essentially the engagement frequency here is 3. The next time they offer their next mini quest won't be till at least 11 of the magical number. And then it allows me to set quest markers. I'm actually using particles instead of like exclamation marks and question marks, which tend to be common. And it just sort of controls the quest givers that I have here. They each have their own scripts on them that provide more detail just so that they can act differently and give different quests. And then finally, again, this is a CSV-based thing. I have a bestiary. It's not bestiary. I always want to call it bestiary because it's about beast, but it's called a bestiary. I have a bestiary manager. And the bestiary manager handles both a beast itself, so the name, display name, description, and flavor of a particular creature, and then observations. What causes the observation to be triggered, the observation text itself. This is sort of just like a generic string that's really the recording of it. The actual display text, and then the item it's talking about. And when I say the item it's talking about, all these observations are on unique ways to interact with creatures to get unique ingredients. So the item is talking about the ingredients that you get from them. Again, this is actually a relatively new addition to the game. It's not in the current demo that's being released because it's requiring a lot of work to just implement the triggering of these observations, as well as ensure that they have proper writing. But it does give the player hints as to how they've gotten certain ingredients, where to get those ingredients. I'm probably going to add another variable in here for whether or not they have read the observation. So that way they can have a little notification like that they have an unread observation in their bestiary. And then when they go to the page where that observation is and mouses over it, I can say that read is true and knock that notification marker off of it. Clearly, lots of people have games that have notifications like that, so that's just a really quick, easy way to implement that with a bool in the data that you're storing. All right. Going back here, so that's actually all the singletons that I have that are persistent again across scenes, allows me to reference a lot of data, has managers that control that data really well, and ensures that that data is loaded so I can easily reference items, everything else as I need. The other thing that I wanted to go over are these non-persistent values. These exist in every single scene, but they are loaded in each scene separately. The first of which is level data. That's really where I just set the music and ambiance, as well as where I can control the level banks that I'm loading into the scene. That is how I decided to handle a lot of the audio loading and unloading is based on these level banks. The event system is actually what works with Rewired. Rewired is what I use for handling controller inputs. I believe that Unity's input management system is relatively good now, but I started this game 9 years ago. If you couldn't tell from how long these dev blogs been going, and Rewired was way, way better than any other potential solution at the time. I didn't feel like rewriting that system. It works well enough. So that's why we're using Rewired. And then the last thing that we have here is a UI manager. I used to add all these individual UI items to the scene, but it just is what loads main menu, the equipment bar, the quest canvas, which shows up on the right side of the screen here when you get a quest. And then the last item, which is loaded, is the recall stone, recall button. Because I have it in this non-persistent data, I can load it and unload it as I want. It is not loaded in this scene, so it doesn't appear here in this corner. Whereas if I checked it, you see it would exist there. She recalls to the town, so it doesn't make sense to have it available here. And as noted, here is the quest canvas just there to the right side. So I know that was a lot of information, but I hope that just talking through the types of data that I'm handling for my game, talking about the loading of that and how I make use of singletons is helpful for you, helps you better control how you're handling data in your game, and hopefully gives you a heads up about systems that you may want to implement now so you can get ahead of them and not waste a lot of time with refactoring and other efforts later. So thank you for watching my dev blog. I hope you enjoy this. And if you'd like to check out Potion's Curious Tale, the demo is actually launching in just a couple days on Steam. So it is likely that by the time you watch this video, dear viewer, whoever you are, that you can play the demo on Steam. So check out Potion's Curious Tale. And thanks for listening. I hope the advice is helpful. Cheers.